Hey, what's going on all you Diecast racing fans? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to answer the #1 question that people constantly ask me here at EP Videos, and that is, how did I build this massive Diorama diecast racing track? Whoa. Not only am I going to answer that question, but we're going to unpack the challenges, the struggles, and finally the triumph that is the finished product, all the nicks, cracks, and crannies that you don't normally get to see during the racing. We're going to unpack that, give you a behind-the-scenes tour of the track. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Now, at first glance, you may notice that Pikes Peak is in a funny L-shaped pattern. Part of the reason I designed it this way is so that I could easily film the cars without having to move too much around the track. Now, it is quite large. It's about 12 feet long, 7 feet deep, and 7 foot tall where the start gate begins. And on the course itself, there is well over 80 feet of track. There might be 82 or 83 feet worth of track. Now to scale, 164, I think doing my math right, it's well over a mile, but if you want to correct me, you can correct me in the comments. Now the reason I named this track Pikes Peak is because I just think the name is so cool, and it's named after a local mountain here in Colorado. Now, like most of you watching this video, my inspiration for building a diecast racing track obviously came from 3D Botmaker. We have to give him the credit for being the pioneer of this sport. Now, after I stumbled onto his channel early in 2021, I was instantly hooked not only on the racing, but I was really intrigued and amazed by the immersive environment that the cars were racing through. So from that moment on, my creative mind was just continuing to wander.
Vicky, are you pondering what I'm pondering?
Asking myself, is this something that I could do? Now, I am a videographer by trade and a photographer, so I already had the camera equipment. Really, all I needed was just the track, the cars, and the diorama. And thinking of it that way, you might say,
I mean, how hard can it be?
But I really underestimated what it means to build a diecast racing track that's fully immersive.
You have an overactive imagination.
Let's just say that building this track was not a simple task. If you go back and watch some of my earlier videos, you may notice that that track looked vastly different from what we see now here at Pikes Peak. At that time, I had a small budget, or almost no budget at all, as many of the materials were scrap wood that I found around my dad's shop. And an old bucket of black paint, I was able to create this unique track that people famously named as the Neon Track, even though I had tried to name it the Underground. Now, it gave me the basic foundation I needed to start building this new track, Pikes Peak. And I actually mean that literally, as not only did this track teach me the ins and outs and the do's and don'ts, but I was able to repurpose quite a bit of the materials, the wood and the base for the new track. So after testing out this track called the Underground, I took the next step in preparing myself to take on the challenge of building Pikes Peak. Obviously, Pikes Peak is inspired by my home state of Colorado, which means I wanted this environment to have mountains, rocks, cliffs, snow, trees, and one big tunnel that I named the Eisenhower Tunnel. I also wanted a small town at the base of the mountain where the finish line was.
I'm talking about a little place called Aspen.
Well, in order to conquer this challenge, I would obviously need a much bigger budget than what I had. I would also need a bigger space and a lot more track. But one of the challenges at that time of building the track was I was only limited to orange Hot Wheels track and Crash Racers track, which is the wider track that you see. Now, thankfully, from the help of an incredible community of diecast racers, they pointed me in the direction of someone who was getting into the business of 3D printing Hot Wheels track. And this was Eric Slan with Slanman Customs. But the next challenge I faced was making sure that I had the right speed dialed in for all of the cars so that they could go from the top of the track all the way to the bottom while maintaining their speed and providing some competitive racing.
Smoke.
So I decided to build not from the top down, but I built from the bottom up. I literally spent hours testing different elevations as well as several different car castings to determine if the cars could handle this mountain track.
Steering's a little loose! Alignment's off too!
Because I invested so much time and energy into tuning the track, I was able to create a highly competitive track with a low rate of DNFs. But after running the cars through the track several times, I realized that the track just wasn't as big as I wanted. So I took it up another 2 levels, I believe. So the next challenge was preparing the track for the diorama. I knew I wanted rocks, cliffs, grass, trees, and snow, but I've never created anything like this before.
You're the creator. Anything that you want, you can build here. This is your world.
So the first thing I needed was a good foundation, something that I could glue and mount the grass, the trees, and rocks to. And thankfully, cardboard is absolutely free.
Okay, here's a guy pooping in a cardboard box down there.
Now this process is pretty simple and straightforward. You use the cardboard to create any landscape you want, and you can staple it right to the frameworks of the track. Now before we get carried away with all these details about the diorama, there is something that I want to talk about that makes Pikes Peak distinctly unique from other tracks. And that's the ability to go from day racing to night racing. And that's all made possible by a USB reading light that I found on Amazon. Now honestly, this light is way better than any standard lighting you might find for a train diorama or 164. Because the difference is these lights, they light up the track like a street lamp, and they're posable, so you can adjust them however you need be. The other part I really like is that they plug in through a USB port, which means if for whatever reason, if they get damaged, which has never happened on my track, you can pull them out and replace them.
The Transformers, more than meets the eye.
So back to the diorama. Once we had all the cardboard and lighting installed, it was now time to dive into the plaster and rocks. I really loved creating all the mountains, shapes, and landscapes of the diorama. And it's pretty simple. You just wet the plaster strips and lay them over some sort of foundation. It could be wads of newspaper, tin foil, or anything that gives you a decent base. So you can literally use trash if you want.
I guess you could say things are getting pretty serious.
Now, as far as the rocks go, those were hand carved from purple wall insulation board that I found at Home Depot. I cut the foam with a hot wire tool and glued all my carved rock shapes onto the cardboard sections of the track where I wanted rock. Now once the plaster has dried and hardened, you can now move on to the next step. So to create a natural texture of dirt and grass on the track, I used a product that's called quilt batting. So the quilting would make up the base, and then I'd come over the top and paint it with a solid brown color. Now after that, I went back over the wet paint with some green flocking that you can find at any hobby shop, and I sprinkled it all over the track until I achieved the landscape look that I wanted. And as for the trees and bushes, I purchased all of those on eBay. Now when it comes to the city at the bottom, most of those buildings were purchased on eBay, except for one of the buildings I personally made, and that's the Vintage Arcade. Now since I completed Pikes Peak, I've made several adjustments to the track with a lot of new additions that enhance the competitive racing experience. So thanks to Spoolheads Racing, a company who prints 3D track parts, I've been able to replace most of the open track sections, expanding it from 2 lanes now to 3 lanes wide, allowing for more opportunities for faster cars to make passes during the race. Spoolheads also designed this awesome custom bridge at the top of the track where the cars start. And they came to our rescue when we were having trouble with our start gate and finish timer, so they replaced all of that. So I want to give a special shout out to Spoolheads and the owner of Spoolheads, Russ. If it wasn't for Spoolheads, Pikes Peak would not be what it is today. So if you're in need of 3D track parts, check out spoolheads.com. Well, that pretty much wraps up everything about the build of Pikes Peak. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. We love talking about our track. And if you really like the channel, like and subscribe. That's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.